iPhone OS 1, launched in 2007 alongside the first iPhone, was literally a revolutionary way to use phones. It was initially unnamed and was a compressed version of the existing macOS. And of course, it was built all around the multi-touch interface. The system used a grid-based home screen called Springboard and came with around 16 built-in apps, including Safari, Maps with Google data, YouTube, and an iPod media player. While you could browse the web, it didn't actually come with any sort of app store. Beyond its innovation, it was very heavily praised for how fluid it felt to use, but also critiqued for lacking basic features like copy and paste. iPhone OS 2, released in 2008 alongside the iPhone 3G, was a major step forward by finally introducing the App Store. It also added the iPhone SDK to let developers build software directly for the App Store instead of having to rely on websites. The update redesigned the Mail app to work better with Microsoft, and overall added a lot of quality of life changes and some very needed features like the ability to save images. The core interface and visuals remained largely the same, however, as all the real work on the iPhone OS 2 was on the App Store and its developer tools. iPhone OS 3, released in 2009, came with many polishes and features users had been requesting for since launch. It introduced copy and paste, MMS support, notifications, voice memos, and the ability to record videos on the 3GS, amongst a few other features. This OS also cost iPod users $9.95 to update to, and was the first version to support the iPad. For developers, Apple expanded the SDK with access to in-app purchases and new APIs for more customization. iOS 4, released in 2010, marked the first time Apple dropped the iPhone OS name, as it was now meant to support devices like the iPad and iPod Touch. Its biggest addition was multitasking, allowing certain apps to run in the background for tasks like music, calls, and location. It added folders for organizing apps, a unified mail inbox, and iBooks app, and finally, FaceTime. For developers, Apple added APIs for the new background tasks and also the ability to advertise through iAd. The design of everything was still familiar, as iOS 4 did most of its work on the flexibility of the platform, but this caused performance issues on older devices like the iPhone 3G, which was its biggest criticism. iOS 5, released in 2011, focused on making the iPhone more independent from a computer by expanding core system features. It introduced a notification center to make them easier to deal with, added Siri, and launched iMessage as Apple's built-in messaging service, alongside a system-wide Twitter integration. The update also added iCloud, arguably the biggest feature in this list, which meant things like backups no longer needed iTunes. It also added the Reminders app, less important but a good change for their goal of making iPhones more independent. However, there was criticism from iPhone 4S users, as the initial release had poor battery life, failures of SIM cards, and echoes during phone calls, which Apple ended up fixing down the line. iOS 6, released in 2012, was Apple's attempt at replacing third-party services with its own ecosystem. The most notable change was Apple Maps, which replaced Google Maps but launched with major issues, including inaccurate data and missing locations, leading to widespread criticism. The update did add many cool features though, like Passbook for storing tickets and boarding passes, Do Not Disturb mode, and expanded Siri with new capabilities like sports scores and restaurant information. Facebook got integrated into the system, and FaceTime became available over cellular. However, the troubled Maps launched overshadowed much of this update. iOS 7, released in 2013, was what many call the most significant redesign in Apple's history. It replaced the previous skeuomorphic style with a flat, minimal interface with thin fonts, bright colors, simpler animations, and a new 3D style for apps. Beyond the visuals, it actually added a lot of huge features like the control center, AirDrop, and CarPlay. It received mixed reactions during its launch, but contradictory was also one of the fastest user-adopted updates ever, which, as we know, ended up becoming a design standard for all other phones. iOS 8, released in 2014, focused on expanding the platform's capabilities much further. It introduced third-party keyboards, allowing users to replace the default iOS keyboard, and added extensions for third-party photo apps, which would let users use their filters in the default camera app. Notifications were changed to let users respond directly without opening the app. Apple also launched HealthKit and HomeKit for developers. This is also where continuity features across Apple devices were added, like the ability to route an iPhone call to your Mac and a few other uses. iOS 9 was released in 2015. Apple optimized the system to run more smoothly on older devices and reduced the amount of storage required for updates. It introduced proactive features which would gather information about the device and user behavior to basically predict what the user might want and to offer that. So if you always open clock at 10 p.m., Siri would begin suggesting you might want to open the app at that time. A couple other cool features were added as usual, with 3D Touch being a big one that is still talked about today. This is also where we got the option of 6-digit passcodes over the previous 4. iOS 10 was released in 2016. It gave the lock screen richer notifications and widgets, and added Race to Wake, which was previously only on the watch. Although it has a history of being against this, Apple expanded Siri, Maps, and Messages with third-party integrations. The Messages app saw one of the biggest changes with apps, stickers, and visual effects. Apple also introduced a Home app for controlling smart home devices through HomeKit, which was previously only accessible to developers. This update also added Universal Clipboard, which is a personal favorite of mine, as it lets you copy something on one device and paste it from another. iOS 11 was released in 2017. The control center was redesigned completely into one unified page with the ability to rearrange the controls. The notification center got built into the lock screen, and Apple finally added the Files app, as previously there wasn't an easy way to browse local and iCloud files on the phone. Apple also introduced ARKit for augmented reality features, which I remember was everywhere after the update dropped. This update added a lot of other big features like the ability to screen record, but this resulted in some bugs, and overall people had mixed reviews on the update, some seeing it as less polished than the previous versions. So iOS 12, released in 2018, focused way more on performance and reliability, especially on older devices, making them faster and more responsive compared to previous versions. A test done by Apple showed that apps would open around 50% faster than before. As most focus went to optimization, less features were added than usual, but we still got screen time along with parental controls, Siri shortcuts and automations, group FaceTime support for up to 32 people, and improvements for augmented reality with ARKit 2. This was also the update that brought us Memojis, for better or for worse. iOS 13, released in 2019, introduced one of the most requested features, system-wide dark mode. It also brought a redesigned Photos app with improved organization and editing tools, along with more major performance improvements. Apple introduced Sign-in with Apple, a fast and quite private way of creating an account, and required all account-based iOS apps to add support for it. This version also marked the split of the iPad into its own platform, iPadOS. iOS 14, released in 2020, introduced major changes to the home screen for the first time. It added widgets that could be placed alongside apps, and the app library, which automatically organized all apps into categories. A great quality change was picture-in-picture, which let videos and calls play without taking up the entire screen. Apple also introduced a cool gimmick called App Clips, which would be these lightweight versions of apps that could be launched instantly from QR codes. And weirdly late into the versions, we got indicators showing when the camera or microphone were in use. Overall, a great update that also added support for virtual car keys for cars that had that technology. iOS 15, released in 2021, finally decided to improve communication, notifications, and on-device intelligence. It introduced focus modes along with a redesigned notification system that grouped alerts more intelligently. FaceTime was upgraded with features like spatial audio, portrait mode, and SharePlay for more synchronized media viewing. Live text allowed for text recognition in photos, powered by the on-device machine learning. Safari received a redesigned, more compact interface, though it was later adjusted after user feedback. Beyond a few other privacy features like IP hiding, this was a smaller update compared to previous ones, but still full of very needed polishes and fixes. iOS 16, released in 2022, introduced one of the biggest lock screen updates in iPhone history. Users could now customize fonts, colors, and add widgets directly to the lock screen, along with creating multiple lock screens tied to focus modes. The Messages app gained the ability to edit and undo send messages, and Mail added features like scheduled send and improved search. Apple also introduced passkeys as a more secure alternative to passwords. Live text and visual lookup were improved, allowing users to interact with text and subjects in images more easily. This was also the update which made AirDrop default to be contacts only after 10 minutes, so that you could no longer send memes to everyone around you, unfortunately. iOS 17 released in 2023 and was intended to be a tune-up release, as Apple wanted to put more resources into their new Apple Vision Pro. Widgets finally became interactive without simply taking you to their respective app. iOS 17 introduced contact posters, which let users customize how they appear on others' devices during calls, and the ability to share contacts by bringing two iPhones close together. We got standby mode, which gave the iPhone a new smart display while charging in landscape mode, which resulted in that one guy freaking out about a red monkey on his phone. But staying true to being a tune-up update, not much other things were added. iOS 18, released in 2024, was the one that introduced the fabled Apple Intelligence, features of which are still delayed to this day. However, we did get cool AI notes, notification summaries, and like a tiny improvement to Siri. And after all these years, it allowed users to freely place app icons and widgets anywhere on the home screen, and let us make tinted icons. The control center was redesigned to be more customizable, and a few cool features like phone mirroring, a passwords app, and RCS messaging were added, which I think made up for the disappointment that was Apple Intelligence. And now, iOS 26, released in 2025, was one of the more unusual iPhone updates because Apple skipped straight from iOS 18 to 26 as part of a new year-based naming system. It introduced liquid glass, the biggest visual redesign since iOS 7, replacing the flat design with a glass-like interface, which got mixed responses, but is something I personally quite like playing around with. Beyond the redesign, iOS 26 added features like call screening, hold assist, and live translation in calls, custom chat backgrounds in messages, lock screen changes like movable widgets, and the ability to transfer eSIMs from and to Android phones without requiring a QR code from the carrier, a nice move from Apple, all with some new ringtones as a cherry on top, something we last got in iOS 17. Leave a comment about a version or specific change that you found interesting. Make sure to subscribe as I'm looking into making a bunch of videos like this one in the next few days, but I do hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.